I'm Jay Melone from New Haircut. If you don't know, Google has global design sprint chapters that they've set up around the world. One of them is run by Jose Manuel from Oslo, Norway. And so his group is the Oslo Design Sprint chapter. And I was fortunate enough to be asked by Jose to come and speak with his community about reframing human-centered problems. This is the step that I use before any critical prototyping activity like a design sprint to help align team members, make sure that you're working on important problems, and ultimately reframe that problem into something that's human-centered and will have a lot of impact on the business. So enjoy this recorded session. It's about an hour or so long, where I give about 20 minutes of presentation on framing and my experience with framing, then answer some top questions that the rest of the attendees had asked, some really powerful questions, great questions. And at the end, stick around to the end, where I give away links to two different toolkits, the problem framing toolkit and our new free problem prioritization toolkit. Enjoy the session. Building trust and engagement is a huge part of this, any kind of success that you have with any meeting, a sprint, a meeting, a workshop, whatever it is. And so New Haircut has been around since 2010, but for the first 7 or 8 years, we were a design and development studio. So groups used to, like Computas would have called us and said, hey, we have this new app that we have in mind. And we would have had a very solution-driven discussion about what you wanted us to build. And then my team would have spent a couple weeks trying to understand it and get familiar with it. And ultimately, we were basically having a conversation about what we were going to build and what it was going to look like. So all very solution-focused. And for us as an outside group, that was really difficult because we had no idea about the context of the business that you were in. Maybe we'd have a little bit of experience if it was some consumer space, but we'd have very little context about what problem you were trying to solve. Behind that solution, what was the problem you were trying to solve? Why was it important? Is it important? Why was it important? To who? Who are those people? How do they solve it today? And so we didn't have really the answers, the tools, or the methods to answer any of those questions. And so in around 2015, the end of 2015, we went out searching for tools and methods to help to fill in some of those gaps so that we could then design and build those better products and services. And one of the tools that we found first was a design sprint, because we had been researching design thinking, right? So we had gone for training through IDEO and Frog and through LinkedIn, in person and remote training. And design thinking was this big topic, and we knew it was important and there were some good principles in there, but we didn't know what it looked like. We didn't know how to apply it to the work that we were being asked to do. And design sprints became the first sort of structured recipe of design thinking that we could take, we could look at it, we could understand it. I'm an engineer and a product manager in my past, so I needed to be able to see what it was. And so we started running design sprints at the tail end of 2015. And at the time, there was Jake and John, and they made themselves available to us and others that were running the process. But there were no additional tools or training around it. And so we just kind of threw ourselves into sprints. And maybe like you, what we found was that we started running sprints on everything. So anytime we wanted to have a conversation about anything, we're like, oh, let's run a sprint on it. And so we started overusing the process. But another thing that happened with us is we use this expression, let the process take care of itself. And so we would show up without really making sure we had the right people in the room, specifically like people that had expertise on whatever challenge we were trying to talk through and work out. We didn't know if there had been research that had been done. So we just assumed that we would get into the sprint the first morning of the sprint and kind of use the understand phase to figure that all out. And Jose, like you, we faced a bunch of challenges with that thinking. And we looked through the book and we started talking with others. And like you mentioned earlier, there was nothing that really talked about what to do beforehand or how to incorporate research or even how to prioritize and make sure that you're working on something that aligns with company vision, that's something that your market cares about. And so we found problem framing as a practice, and we didn't invent problem framing for sure. But what we did is we took the sort of the mindset and the principles that we had appreciated from design sprints and what we were starting to accompany back to design thinking. And we said, how can we structure this part of the process to use all of those tenets and principles to help figure out what problems we should be talking about, what things are a good fit for a design sprint, so that we made sure by the time, at the time, of course, we were flying all over the world. So before we get on a plane, before we book travel, before we even agree to work with a group, let's make sure that this is something that we should be talking about and running a sprint on. So that's just kind of some of the background. And since then, I've run, I've lost track, but I've run a lot of sprints. I've put a lot of workshops together. And most recently, over the last couple of years, we've been doing a lot of problem framing and taking this process and making it our own. So what we did do is create a problem framing process, which we'll cover today, which takes about a day to do. And I'm also going to talk about how to split that up and do it over a couple days, how to do it remotely. But it's been a great learning adventure. So, and at the end of this, I'm also going to share access. I'm going to review the toolkit that I've created to help with problem framing. And I also just launched, literally just yesterday, a free version of a portion of the toolkit that I'm going to give to you guys so that you can experiment with it for free. So that's me. Just some other things that I've done besides the toolkits. I created a facilitation mini course, which is also free. If you go to our website, there's a black banner at the top. You can click through that. It's a free course that I've created. You get 30 tips over 30 days, and it kind of takes you through the big, hairy, challenging parts of being a facilitator. So leading remote teams, building trust, engaging people to join in the discussion in your workshops, and then diving into specific frameworks like sprints and framing and research. So that's another thing. We also, a long time ago, when we really wanted to learn sprints, we created a free iOS and Android app called Duco. You can also find that. Maybe I'll put it into the chat, or maybe Jose, you can just throw it in the chat for me. It's Duco, like on the screen, .newhaircut.com. And then along the way, we were training a lot of groups because, like Duco, the best way that I learn is by teaching others. So like rolling up I'm an engineer, so I need to get into it to really understand what I'm doing and practicing, especially if I want to give it to others. And so we created Duco to really learn the process of sprints. Duco is just basically an app to help you plan and plan out your design sprints, but it's a bit old. So we created it about 3, maybe 4 years ago now. And I haven't updated it since because I've been spending a lot of time building the toolkits, but it's free and it's available if you're getting started with sprints. And the other thing that we did along the way in terms of training was we created this academy within New Haircut where we could train other groups. So we were teaching design sprints, but then all sorts of things that we were using and applying inside New Haircut. That became the Design Sprint Academy. And then along the way, we actually split those two companies up. So my former business partners, John and Donna, run the Design Sprint Academy based out of Berlin, and I run New Haircut these days. So that's the history of me and all the stuff that I've been doing. So I give you a break from listening to me. I wanted to play a quick video for you, which I tend to play at the start of any workshop that's about ideation and innovation. So let's see if I can make this work. Oops. Give me 1 sec.
Meet Small Interactive.
Jose, I just want to check in with you. You can hear the sound? Good. Okay. I'll keep playing.
Meet Smalt, the world's first interactive centerpiece that enhances your dining experience. Smalt has a sleek and portable design. Features a built-in mood light to set the ambience, a Bluetooth speaker that delivers a crisp and powerful sound, and it's a smart salt dispenser. Shake, pinch, or pour, all using your smartphone. Smalt comes with Amazon Alexa integration for the times you need an extra hand. Simply say, Alexa, dispense half a teaspoon of salt. Pair your phone with Smalt to stream your favorite music and let the entertainment begin. Let SMALT be the conversation piece of your dinner party. Open your SMALT app and simply pinch the screen or shake your phone to dispense salt. After all, SMALT is a smart salt dispenser. Set the perfect ambience with SMALT's color-changing mood light. Engage all your senses with SMALT, the world's first interactive centerpiece.
So, I don't know about you, but I'm perfectly fine with using my little salt shaker and just doing this. I also don't need my salt shaker to play music or be an ambient mood light. And so I feel bad knocking this product because this was an engineer that was really excited to make a smart salt shaker, but I'm not sure what problem he was solving. And I think at some point maybe he discovered that this wasn't an important problem. So what do? We start chasing and start building features on top instead of really understanding, is there a problem here to be solved? And so that is really the premise of problem framing, is because before you get into the mode of designing and iterating and ideating different solutions, you have to really make sure that you're attacking a problem, that there's a market for, that if there is a market, how embedded are those people in the existing solutions? Are they willing to change direction and adopt a new solution? So that's kind of like where the genesis of problem framing came from us. It also came because, as I mentioned, we were running lots and lots of sprints, right? So this is the design sprint meetup. So I assume a lot of you are familiar with what design sprints are. And when we got into them, what I started to allude to earlier was we misunderstood the understand phase. So we assumed that you could just kind of get in the room Monday morning or whatever day one is for you and figure it all out. Figure out, like, what are we here to talk about? Who's in the room? What research have we done beforehand? And what we learned, for us personally, what we learned was on more than one occasion, we would all be in this space and we didn't have a lot of those things together. We didn't have the right people. We learned during the course of this day one, or during the sprint itself, that we were solving for a problem that really didn't need a solution. And that is where sprints can ultimately really fall on their face and fail. What you won't fail, sprints don't fail because you put something in somebody's hands and they have feedback on it and then you need to iterate. That's the spirit of the sprint, is taking a solution that's an important problem. But where sprints can fail is if you're, the expression I use is barking up the wrong tree. If you're attacking a problem where there's plenty of solutions, people don't care about a new solution to it. And so what we started to do was take this understand phase and move it outside of the sprint. Because really, if you're all familiar, this is the double diamond process that comes out of design, right? And so what we started to understand after being in a sprint and realizing that we were attacking the wrong problem or an unimportant problem, we realized that sprints really sit here. So sprints are at the very early part of the solution phase, right? Because the double diamond is all about discovering important problems and then quickly iterating and finding solutions to those problems. So it's really, sprints sit here. And we were assuming that we could figure out this whole part right here at the very early stage of the sprint. But, you know, between getting people on planes or getting people's schedules aligned, or even finding those people with the necessary and specific expertise is not easy. Because a lot of the topics that you're all running sprints on are really specific, really important, really kind of niche challenges. So what we started to do was to unpack all the problem identification and prioritization and the reframing of those problems before our sprints. So really what we were doing is we started to understand that problem validation sits in one space. So that's the first diamond. And then solution validation, where sprints and rapid prototyping and other practices in there sit in that second diamond. And the other thing we started to realize is, when and how can we bring pre-existing research into the conversation? And at what point during framing and sprinting and all the way through market launch, when should we continue to go back and learn and bring additional research, or pause to do additional research and bring that in? We learned from a lot of great people. Like I said, we did not invent problem framing. So we learned from all these existing sources. We've taken frameworks that have been used elsewhere to incorporate them into our practice. One of the people that we learned from is Patrick Whitney. He is a director. He's a professor that teaches at the Illinois Institute of Technology. I don't know if he still teaches there, but this is a great video. It's 7 minutes long, and it talks about taking and abstracting problems so that you can really understand the place where people are coming from. And he uses a great example, an age-old example of how Apple really rethought and abstracted out the problem that people faced when trying to listen to music. This is when they were kind of like in the space of developing the iPod and the iTunes marketplace. And it's really an interesting talk. Because if you go right from where you're at today to solution mode, then it's just very linear thinking. And that often doesn't help to break through these new and bold ideas, right? It's the classic quote that a lot of folks in the US use about Henry Ford, right? If you ask them if they wanted a car, they would have talked about faster horses. I totally butchered that quote, but that's the point, is really trying to like step out of the place where you're at to understand where people are with that problem today and thinking very differently. So we learned from Patrick, we learned from a whole bunch of folks, and the simplest way to visualize what we did is we took framing and we put it before our sprints. So today, I can't think of a sprint or anything that's any kind of workshop that is a day or longer that's all about solutioning. I can't think in the last few years where I haven't done some form of framing before then. So we have a full day-long framing process, but I also break it down, and it really depends where the group is at, how much research they've done, what they know about the space, how well they've already defined the challenge. But there's always an opportunity, if not from just a pure alignment standpoint, to bring me into the fold, to bring others that are joining the conversation, just to have a quick alignment discussion. And so I use framing for a whole bunch of reasons, mainly to discover. So if you're really starting at the early stages, some groups use my framing practice to help define their vision or set their OKRs or figure out what their roadmap and their priorities are going to be. And then from those, we can prioritize, because like a design sprint, framing is all about finding that top problem or opportunity, same thing, that you want to have a conversation about, that you want to learn about, that you want to eventually solve. And so framing starts with this sort of landscape of, you discover and talk about a landscape of opportunities that you're interested in exploring, and then starting to whittle down so that you ultimately get to the top problem. What's the thing, what's the project that the group is most inspired to move forward with? Because how does prioritization and decision-making typically work? Well, most of the time, senior leadership, managers, right? It's the corner office or a select group of people that are deciding what the team is going to spend the next week or month or year working on. And so if you're like me, I want to say in terms of what I'm going to work on. And I have all this experience because I've been spending all of my time working with this customer, with this market, with these ideas. And I'd like a chance to be able to be part of that conversation, to decide what we all work on. So this framing democratizes that process. It also uses design thinking so that we can sort of try to reduce some of the bias that we bring into these conversations. So then we, like all good design thinking practices, we bring the voice of the customer into it so that we can humanize and understand what their current experience is like working through the problem today. And then we end by reframing the problem. So we take everything that we've learned and we reframe it into a statement that's clear, that's actionable, that's human-centered, so that we understand where that person is coming from. There's a great quote that we've been using for years now, and it's: a problem clearly stated is a problem half solved. So if nothing else happens, but the team feels aligned and clear on what the project is all about, or what the mission is, what the challenge is, then you're already 10 miles down the road, or 10 kilometers down the road. So clearing up ambiguity, right? So at the end of all that work, I always joke, because at the end of this day long, it's a really intense workshop. Problem framing is by far the hardest thing that I lead, both for myself and the folks that show up to be part of that conversation. At the end of all that hard work, we're left with a sentence. So, but that sentence helps to structure and make the the challenge in front of us, the challenge we might bring into a design sprint, super clear. Jose, I just want to check in. Everything's still okay? Sound, you can hear me? All good? Okay, I'll keep going. And so, actually, let me take a drink. And so the problem framing process that we put together over the course of years, we didn't snap our fingers and this was all perfect overnight. But the process that we put together is 8 steps. I've added a 9th optional step just to make sure if you're at the end, you want to have another level of discussion about the reframed problem that you've come up with. But in a sense, there's these 3 swim lanes. And Jose started to share some of the questions that have come up before the workshop. And one of the questions was about like, what are good questions to be asking? Or like, when will you know that you have a problem that's a good fit for a design sprint? And so the way that I define a sprint is all about new ideas. You know, you're innovating. Maybe you're innovating an existing product or service. Maybe you're creating something entirely new. But the idea is to challenge existing ideas, to learn about this new space by creating prototypes and testing ideas really rapidly. And so anything that's fit for a design sprint I think it needs to satisfy 2 customers. One is the business. So the company that's paying us all to do the work, that is the structure that's supporting all of this thinking. So the company, there needs to be some win, some impact for the company. So I actually start by thinking about the company, because we go right into human-centered thinking and we go out into the market and we find this really exciting problem that a set of folks is struggling with today that has nothing to do with the priorities and the alignment and the initiatives of the company. That's when you're going to get senior leadership swooping in and saying, stop, this is not something that is on our roadmap. It's not something we're excited about. So I actually start with the company to find something that would create impact for the company. Then I move in. So that's what this first sort of light gray swim lane is all about. Then I move into understanding the people that are affected by that problem. So I use a 2-step process of both identifying the landscape of stakeholders and users that are affected by that problem, and then whittling in and finding that person or persona or group of people that would be most impacted if we were to solve this problem. And then that becomes the focus. Just like in a design sprint, you're finding that one persona to focus on. I actually do this before I do it during framing. I'll talk a little bit about that later or during Q&A. And then finally, I take those 2 things and now I have what's important and impactful to the company and what would solve an important problem to the market and the human being that we're trying to solve for. And the space between those, something where the company is excited about solving, or maybe they're already putting resources and budget into, and a space where the people affected by that problem have challenges and questions and concerns, that becomes this great space to improve and altogether innovate, right? Wins for the company, current problems for your customer, perfect for an opportunity to sprint on and solve. So that's what framing is all about for me. It's basically finding this intersection between something that would create great impact for the company and lots of value for the people that you're serving, your users, your customers, your fans and followers. What I wanted to do is just, one of the questions I get all the time is what goes into framing. And so it's never just a workshop, right? And so that's the point of this. A sprint is never just a sprint, because if you just show up and run a sprint, you're not prepared, you don't know who's in the room, there's a good chance that you're not going to get the success or you're going to get to the level of conversations that you're looking for. And framing is not just a workshop. So there's always some planning to be done. So where I start with framing is a week or 2 beforehand, I'll be asking, what do you know about this space? What have you done so far? What have you created? I think, Jose, another question that came up was something about what do you do with groups that are already sort of have a product or service that they've created? If that's something that they've created, then I'll start there. And I almost consider that my prototype. And so I'll dig into what's been created so far and the reactions that product or service has generated. And if nothing exists, which some groups, they haven't really spent much time, I'll ask them for research and they'll send me a very generic 5-question survey that really didn't light off any insights. Then I'll do the research myself, or if they have a research department, then I'll partner with them to go out to the field to talk with their customers, to interview their stakeholders inside the company. And so what I'm trying to do there is to make sure that I have sort of the foundation of those two customers I talked about. I know a little bit about what's important to the company so that I can manage the conversation as the facilitator, so that I know when we're going out of bounds. And then I know a little bit about the market itself. So because I'm not coming to be the expert on the customer, but I'll know where there's gaps in the conversation, or when we may need to pause or bring in a researcher or a UX designer to talk about that market and that customer and how we feel about them. So a bit of research that I'll start 1 to 2 weeks before. And then I start to build up all my pre-work. So pre-work takes the form of activities, and this has shifted a lot actually during 2020, where now my work started, I started doing more and more remote workshops and facilitation in 2017. So I was really fortunate in the sense that I was forced to figure out remote back before it became a mandate and before a global pandemic hit us all in the face. So what I mean by pre-work is a few things. One is to get all the actual research collected and organized and together, to visualize that, so that when we get into the workshop, we can look at something and understand it, and that's where we start the conversation. The other thing I'll do is introduce people to the tools. So if we're using tools like Mural or Miro or Figma or wherever else we're going to be collaborating, Slack, even Slack, I'll use pre-work to introduce those tools and get the conversation started in there, so we can work out all those technical challenges, get people over the fear and anxiety of doing that work and holding those conversations in those tools. And then the other thing is to actually start to seed the topic itself. So this is the challenge we're going to be focused on. This is what we're expecting each member of the team to bring to that conversation. So I also use this as a chance for me to make sure that I have the right people in the room. And some people will use this process to actually opt out. And they'll say like, I would love to be part of this. It seems really interesting, but I don't know enough about this space. And then I can make sure that I'm not figuring that out on Monday morning of my design sprint. And so this whole process is 1 to 3 weeks beforehand. Give myself some time, get to do all the interviews, to gather all the research, and then to make sure I have all the people showing up and in the room. The workshop itself, of course, once we get to the workshop, takes about 8 hours. So in the world where we're all working together and in the same room, which I miss a lot, and I hope that we can get back to that at some point, an 8-hour workshop, totally doable. I've done 12-hour workshops. You can make it work. I've made it work. Give people lots of breaks, go out for lunch, go walk for a walk around the block. In the remote setting, an 8-hour workshop is tough. And so more and more of the remote framing stuff that I do is split out into 2 days. And what I've also done is I've taken those first 3 steps of the process, which, let me go back. So problem discovery, problem sensing, and problem categorization. What those 3 steps are really all about is prioritizing. So that's finding the top problem that we're going to spend the rest of the workshop talking about. So that is a sort of this compact, it's a conversation and a workshop that I can do in about 2 to 3 hours. And it's complete in the sense that we have our top thing identified. And then I come back the second day and I do the rest of the activities. What I've also done is turned those 3 steps into its own resource and free toolkit. That's actually what I'm going to share with you all at the end of this. Go back. And so what does this look like, especially in today's world of nonstop murals and Zoom calls? So this is actually what it looks like. It looks like a lot because it is a lot, and it's a really hard conversation. And so I talked about these 8 steps. And so for each step, of course, I have an activity. It's visualized. It uses design thinking to make sure that I'm hearing all the ideas, reducing bias, eliminating groupthink as much as possible, visualizing the conversation. So there's an activity for each step that I've created. And at the end of it, you're left with I've lost my mouse, but at the end of it, I don't know if you can see it. Step 8 is problem reframing. So at the end of all of this stuff, what we're doing is we're describing the challenge that we want to take forward. And we answer these 5 key points. So what's the problem all about? Why is it important? Who are we solving for? How is it important to them? And ultimately, how will we measure success of this? So maybe thinking about some benchmarks and metrics, because remember I talked about satisfying the needs and creating impact for the company. So really, one question I get a lot is, how do we get stakeholders? How do we get busy executives to join this session? And sometimes the answer is you can't. But what's really great is that when you go through this conversation, and if you explain to the group that, like, hey, look, this is going to take us a day or two, not going to take us a month, but we're going to have this conversation. We're going to hold this together. And at the end of it, myself or somebody on the team is going to take all of the conversations, all of the ideas and the outputs, and that becomes a great conversation to have with the busy executive, right? So I would take it and say, hey, I know you couldn't join us for last week's session. This is what we talked about. These are the ideas that we prioritized. This is how we're thinking about them. This is the market we think this would be important for. And ultimately, this is the prompt and the challenge that we want to move forward with. And that becomes a much better conversation to have with the busy executive than what should we work on, or we're trying to tackle this thing, what's important to you? That's a blank canvas. Any kind of blank canvas conversation with somebody that's thinking about 20 other things typically doesn't go that far. What actually happens then is that person wants to join the next framing workshop because they see that their time's not going to be wasted, and they see just sort of the outputs and the ideas that's going to be generated. So sometimes just use the first framing session to get others to join the next one, because it's a day, it's 2 days. And so that's more or less, Jose, I think, how are we doing on time? Pretty good. That's the end of the presentation. There's 2 things that's available to you. So the problem framing toolkit is something you pay for. It's $397 US. That includes the facilitator's guide to help you, the facilitator, get through all of these activities and plan your time, get the team ready, steps you through everything you need to know about the toolkit. There's instructional videos that I've created for each step and each activity. There's a presentation deck that the team can follow along with during the workshop. And what else is there? And there's the templates. So there's the mural and Miro templates to actually hold the workshop and the conversation. I do understand that this is 2020 and the world, it's crazy. A lot of us lost our jobs, budgets have been cut. So even something that's less than $500 US, there's no spending. So what I tried to do is find something. So I took those 3 steps, which is all about discovery and prioritization, and I launched it in this free, what I'm calling problem prioritization toolkit. So it's sort of like a subset of problem framing. So I'll just put these 2 QR codes back. I should have probably had a slide with both of them up, but if you hold your phone up to the QR code, you'll get links to it. And once you're on the page for this one, you can click through and find the link to the other one. But this is problem framing, and this is problem prioritization.
Okay.
Yeah, that's and I'll just leave the free one up while we're talking. So let's see. My toolbar. Okay, so it's 11:41. So Jose, we have this set up as till 6 p.m. local.
Yeah.
But if there's more questions that come up that go beyond 20 minutes, then I'm going to stick around and we can keep talking for another 30 minutes or so.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Cool. So let's see. I have the Q&A in front of me.
Can you see any questions? Because I have the Q&A and there is no questions shown in my in my screen.
It's like I took over your webinar. I'm not sure. Yes, I see 4 questions. Well, okay, one isn't a question. It's just a great example around solution first mindset. Thank you. That was from Talal, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce anybody's name. Okay, so first question I see from Olivia. She asks, Olivia has two questions. Her first question is, do you have this mural saved as a template that others? Yeah, so yes, I do. The mural and Miro templates are available in the problem framing toolkit. That's the full version. And then the first 3 steps are available for free in this prioritization toolkit. And those are available. If you purchase the problem framing, of course, they're available to you. For mural, what happens is you click a button that says create template, create mural from template, and then it's yours, and you can use it as you like. In Miro, you actually get a file that downloads to your desktop, and you can import it into your Miro account, and then it becomes a template you can use there. So it works in either place. I'm also working with Envision to create these toolkits and templates in freehand. Yeah, freehand. So in freehand, these toolkits will be supported in freehand, hopefully in the next few months. Let's see. Olivia also asked, what methods for primary research do you find most useful? Well, so there's 2 types of research that I do. One is internal, so I'll talk to stakeholders to ask them what's important, where do they want the group to focus, how do they want to use this conversation. So some executives or stakeholders want to put some like guardrails on the conversation. So they might want to talk about the industry that they're interested in, the market, maybe even technology, or sort of like the channel and the medium that they want the bounds of this conversation to be within. And then other executives want to use framing to set vision. So they want to use framing as sort of like a greenfield conversation to let the group identify the problems and opportunities that they want to work on, that they think would be important to the company to focus on. So those are some of the conversations I have with stakeholders. And then going and talking with the market itself. So a lot of the time I'll either partner with their research team, because they've already been talking with folks in the market. If they haven't, and if research in general is new to them, then just doing screeners to make sure that we find the right people that we're trying to potentially talk with. It's a little bit early in the conversation because we don't get to identifying the exact market until midway in the framing conversation. And so if that's the case, and if you don't have research that you've already done about that persona or that group, then that's a great time to pause and allow the designers and researchers to go and spend time talking with those folks and saying, hey, this is a space, this is a problem we're trying to think through. Is this important to you? How do you solve it today? What does that look like? Can you tell me examples and stories of what that looked like? What are the challenges you face today? Because of course, how they're solving it is good, but really the goal there is the challenges that they face. Sometimes I do switch interviews, which is the jobs to be done technique. So if they're using an existing solution, then a switch interview, basically the premise of a switch interview is to see those moments where they walk further toward their existing solution they're using, and then moments where they sort of retreat away from it. And if they've made a recent switch to something new, they're really interesting folks to talk through because they can take you through that mental journey and actual experience of when they started thinking about other solutions, who they talked with, what it looked like for them, the conversations that eventually led to switching into a different solution. Because that's you can see what their mindset is, how open they were to new solutions, and you can start to think about, if you do move forward in this space, how you would want to put your solutions in front of them. So qualitative research, I'm not a trained researcher, so I don't really bring in a lot of quantitative data, but I will go and I'll carve out and talk with 5 to 10 folks, do 30 to 60 minute web or in-person interviews with them. Okay, now the questions are rolling in. Okay, I hope that was helpful, Olivia. Tom asks, you mentioned metrics for stakeholder results. Can you give examples? Metrics, yeah. Well, of course, context is important. So some of them might just be, well, it's hard because it's very specific and contextual to what the company is working on. So an example might be, if the executive was really focused on improving onboarding of an existing platform, then what are all sort of the metrics that you could help to measure that if we were to solve this problem, our onboarding metrics would be refined and improved. And so maybe you might pull out a few of those to just measure and see that you have this sort of long-term trajectory of where solving this problem would improve these baseline metrics. You don't know what the solution would be, of course, quite yet, but if we were to attack this problem, these 2 or 3 things should uptick, should improve. I hope that was helpful, Tom. Ram, or is it Ram? One of those. I think you said, so this is from Ram, I think you said that you do problem framing remotely. Could you tell us more about how you conduct the research part remotely? Yeah, well, in 2017, quick story is that I was getting ready to work with Rosetta Stone, which is a language learning company based in the US, 30-year-old company, have a lot of older ways and systems of doing things, and they were about to walk into a totally new market. So they sell their language learning packages direct to consumer, and they were actually trying to sell something to schools to help English language learners. Totally new market, doing things very differently than their traditional solutions, and they wanted to use a design sprint to help them think through new ideas. And I ran a day and a half before I was going to conduct some interviews with them and some framing. I learned that two of my 4 customers, my clients, would not be in the room. They're like, they'll just dial in. I was like, no. So I panicked, and I was like, okay, we're going to do this totally differently. We did it remotely, and I used Mural at the time because I had just met Jim Kalbach from Mural, and he offered me the tools for free. So I ran the session remotely, and I was really nervous about it. No one was doing remote anything, and even I thought like remote facilitation is a joke because I can't see you, I can't put my arm around you, I can't like, let's go get a beer over here and talk about it. I can't do any of that stuff. I can't manage the energy and the conversations. I can't really see all the sidebar conversations that are happening and pull people back in. So I was like, no way. But I did it, and it went really, really well. And so I've been doing remote really ever since and going deeper and deeper into it. And then luckily COVID hit and all of our stuff is remote. So really the way that it looks different is it's more bite-sized. So instead of, like I said earlier, instead of doing like an 8-hour long intense session, I'll break it up over 2 or 3 days. I make sure that I explain the overall arc of the program and the set of workshops that we're going to be doing to make sure there's a lot of space in between, because spacing things out from 1 day to a few days, then you need to give people time to recover and go and do their normal work. So I put a lot of time in between framing and the next set of research or the sprints itself. And I use all these great tools that have been around, but now there's tons of resources being filled into them. Mural, Miro, Slack, Envision has a whole suite of tools, all sorts of stuff like that. Let's see. Okay. Crap, I'm gonna mispronounce your name because I'm a shitty American. Hakon Herland is your last name, I believe. Wait, his question just disappeared. Okay, there it is. Do you have an example of a problem that you have worked on that is outside the typical digital product service area? Yeah. I have a really good one. I just have to be careful what I say about it so that I don't get sued. I worked with a bunch of really large companies, US-based companies, but really big companies. I don't say that because I work with big companies. I say that because problem framing is a really hard conversation. And a lot of us think that like only startups and small teams can do this stuff and do design thinking and be in this mindset. But big companies are definitely investing in it. And so it's really cool when they make when they get past that initial fear and do some of this stuff. So 5 big companies. So normally problem framing is one group of people, at least working in the same company, sometimes the same team or department. This was 5 different companies, all really huge brands. So, and actually Kai and I did this workshop together, and we were helping them think through a totally new consumer experience around recycling. So it had very little to do with any kind of product or visual, and it was really more about the mindset people have around in the US around recycling. I think I'm still safe. If I'm in jail next week, then you'll know that I said too much. But yeah, that was, man, so cool. I'm an environmental science and bio major. So for me, the chance to get to work with all of these big companies that were helping to rethink global recycling programs, really cool. So problem framing is really just, it's a conversation around strategy and finding important needs that people have. So it has very little to do with the final form and the solution itself. So I appreciate your question about that. Best tip to deal with fixed mindset people. Don't invite them. No. You know what? I'm actually fairly fixed mindset. I thought remote wouldn't work. I thought I was always going to be an engineer. The only thing that you can do is to invite them into the practice and the process and hear them and listen to them and give them opportunities to be heard and to hear others, right? So a lot of people that are fixed mindset are actually, the problem behind that is fear. So fear of showing up, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of being judged. Guess what? That's the human experience. Those people are just a little bit more afraid. So giving them opportunity to show them that it's going to be okay to be part of the conversation, to share ideas, to show them that some of their ideas they can keep private. So there's even great tools that are rolling out in Mural and Miro so that you can write ideas down, but keep them private. Really just the essence behind or beneath all that is just building trust, showing them that it's going to be safe to share ideas. There's a great study that Google did a long time ago that builds off the work of Amy, Edmondson, I think, psychological safety. So I've spent a lot of time learning and pouring some thinking into how can I establish better psychological safety in the workshops and then the conversations that I'm leading. Because if it's innovation and new thinking, then it's going to take some big, bold ideas, and big, bold, innovative, creative ideas don't happen unless there's safety. If you haven't watched Brené Brown or read any of her books, I highly encourage you to check out Brené Brown. I seem to have lost the chat. Brené Brown, B-R-E-N-E, Brown, like the color. First thing you'll probably find is her TED Talk on vulnerability. And she talks about bringing vulnerability and courage into these really hard conversations around creativity and new thinking. It's a great conversation. 20-minute TED Talk. Okay. Yvonne asks, how do you approach how do you approach working with brands that resist the problem framing process? Some of my team members resist nailing down top priority problem. They want the flexibility to change their minds on where to focus. So maybe what you might start with, Yvonne, is just doing the prioritization piece of 2 to 3 hours. There are moments where people, if you dig into the toolkit, you'll learn more about step 1. And in step 1, there's a chance for the stakeholders or the team members themselves to agree upon the bounds of the conversation. What I also tell people is that we're going to spend 2 hours on this conversation, and we're going to choose one problem to work on for the next day or so. And so I always try to make sure that people understand this is 2 hours. The next step is 4 hours. And if at the end of that, we decide to change direction, we will have wasted a grand total of 6 hours, which For me, coming from the world of corporate, we would have wasted 6 months on that. So 6 hours is not a big chunk of time to feel like you've lost. And instead, what actually happens is that conversation might seed a new and even more interesting idea that you want to take forward. So I think the spirit of iteration should totally be worked in and part of how you lead those workshops, making sure that the group understands we're going to decide on something today, and we're going to see if we want to run it forward from here, or if not, now we have a whole landscape of other things that we may want to work on and tackle. And because it's using design thinking, there's not an opportunity for people to pitch and do their best sales impersonation of why this is the problem that we should be working on. It's a very visual and sort of unbiased conversation. That was part of the idea of creating this prioritization process and framing process. Okay. So bear with me, something's going on in the Q&A where questions are jumping around a little bit. So I just need to find the next one. Well, here's one from Soha. How do you make sure you did enough research and move to the next point? What information would be conveyed to the design team, UX and UI designers, to make sure they can kick off the feature design correctly? Well, okay. Research is, it's a little bit of a big term. So I use research to make sure I know enough to begin something like framing. And then I use research to make sure that I know enough about moving into the solution space. And I use framing, I use the outcomes that I'm trying to get to for framing, which is a clear, actionable business challenge. And the output, the final state of design sprint, which is a user-tested, validated prototype or something that we can learn from. And then I basically reverse engineer what questions do we need to answer, what things do we need to hear from outside of this room, what voices and perspectives do we need outside of this room to make sure that we can continue to whatever the next step is. And so for a visual designer, a prototype with recorded testing of your target market, reacting to it and giving you insights, for me tends to be the next step that you can move it into their hands of designing and visualizing the actual solutions. That was what we were looking for when we found design sprints, because we had designers and engineers, they just didn't know if they were solving things the way that the customer wanted it to be solved. So the answer is enough research means that you've identified a problem that is impactful for the company and potentially going to solve and create value for the user. That's the enough at the end of framing, and at the end of design sprints, it's a validated prototype. I hope that helped. Okay. It looks like we have 3 more questions and we're at 12. So if you have to go, thank you. Thank you for being here. I'll stick around and answer the rest of these questions. And I think, let me just put up my contact info. I didn't have a chance to step you through the 3 activities in the free toolkit, but it's free. So you can look at them yourself, and there's videos where I step you through them so you know what they're all about and how to lead them. And then if you want to connect, I'd love if you want to continue asking questions and just connect in general, here's my contact info. But I'll keep going because there's 3 more questions. How many people and what roles do you include when problem framing and running design sprints with your clients? That's from Daniela. So the answer is a little bit generic in the sense that it needs to be somebody that has experience and expertise of the space that where you're operating today. So in problem framing, it's a little bit more abstract because you're not sure which problem area you're going to be working in. So if I jump to sprints, when you get into a sprint, you should have a clearly articulated business challenge around a specific problem that you're solving. If you do framing first, you also know which persona, which sort of customer segment you want to focus on. I don't leave that to the sprint itself. I define all of that stuff during framing, because otherwise you don't even know what market you're talking with. It's debatable whether you'll be able to line those people up for interviews at the end of your sprint. So I do all of that definition during framing. And so I know who I need in my sprint because I've done my framing. I know exactly what problem I'm solving. So making sure I have good representation, cross-functional representation from the team that can speak from an informed standpoint about that problem space. But when it's for problem framing, now I need people, it's a smaller group. It tends to be people that are thinking about strategically, where does the company want to be? Where do we want to be playing over the next 6 months to a year, 2 years? Because it's more visioning and strategic planning. So I have VPs and directors, people that are in charge of customer experience or marketing, people that are really, they have the authority and the information in order to say, yes, this is a good place for us to be operating within. Let's move forward with this idea. And then you have some of the top folks, the top operational folks that can move those ideas forward, right? So if you have like your head of UX or head of engineering, people that can contribute to the conversation and then continue to take those ideas forward. And then Lena asks, how do you manage hierarchy and power dynamics within the workshops? Well, so here's the thing. I'm an outsider, so I get away with a little bit more than you might be able to. I can talk to your boss differently than you can talk to your boss, perhaps. I hope that that's not the case, but unfortunately, it is the case in a lot of the world. So I can experiment, I can ask more powerful questions, but what I also try to do is I talk to everybody before I get into a workshop so that I know where they're coming from, what they're expecting to get out of this, what's worked, what's not worked, what are they afraid of? A lot of people are afraid of wasting time about what would that look like if we were to waste your time? And so when it comes to someone that's using power and trying to exert power, I can go back to understanding all the sort of the fear and the expectations they had so that I can make sure that we're aligning back to what is important to that person. I also use, so like if a person's being totally obnoxious, then there's a bunch of things that you can pull them aside. You can really understand where their fear and anxiety is coming from. Sometimes I give them a job. They just really need to be busy and they're kind of sitting idle. Other times I learn that they're not even really helping and contributing to the conversation, and they're feeling sort of like, I'm this important person and I can't contribute to this part of the conversation. So really understanding who's in the room with me beforehand and not just kind of like falling into that during the workshop itself. A lot of it honestly comes down to really mostly we're children in these workshops. So understanding that people are afraid, there's certain roles that they have to play, and making sure that I know who's in that space with us. And most of the time, making sure that that person feels heard and acknowledged. If I can cross that bridge first, then a lot of their attempts to exert power over me or the rest of the group doesn't go away completely, but it shifts. But it takes work beforehand to know who's in the room and how you want to manage that. And a lot of the time, the biggest challenge I faced was designing time in the workshop and the conversation for team building, for alignment, for feeling safe. And a lot of executives, not a lot, but some executives would look at me and say, we hired you to do this, to do the design sprint. Why are we doing team building? Why are we doing check-ins? Why are we doing alignment activities? And my answer would be, because without that, no one's going to feel safe to raise their hand and encourage the big, bold ideas. And then as a result of that, you're going to get solutions that were safe, same things you've been talking about for the last year, and that's going to feel like a big waste of everybody's time. Jose, it looks like we have 2 more questions. Man, I hate butchering people's names. Seiram, any thoughts on how design sprints can be implemented in public sector, government, or municipalities? Any examples given that there are different frameworks? I've been asked to help government agencies, both agencies and the clients that they support, I don't have a lot of like direct experience with this. I run a program called Innovation Leadership Accelerator, and there was one woman that came to the last program who works with police officers and I think military. And so everything that she does needs to be, there's always a lot of like brazen characters in her workshops. There's literally rank. So people that are high ranking do all the talking. So she needs to do even more of what I was just explaining, making sure that everybody knows that they're going to have a chance to, their ideas are going to be heard. Really allowing for a lot of divergent thinking and showing everybody's ideas up in the same space. Everyone's being evaluated, no one's being shunned. And then for the people that are doing all the talking, sort of demonstrating power, like I said earlier, making sure they know that it's safe, that we hear you, and there's other folks here that we're going to hear from them as well. Not that all government is like that. I just know that things move slower, and it's a different ballgame in terms of like getting clearance. There's a lot of safeguards around conversations. So most of the time, whenever I'm entertaining government work, everything moves much more slowly because there needs to be clearance, there needs to be approval, there needs to be sign off on information that's shared. I don't say that I have much more in terms of different ways that I facilitate a government group versus any other working group. All right, last. Oh, cool. Thanks, Olivia. Olivia jumped in and offered some advice too to that last question. Okay, last questions from Ram. You said that you overused the sprint process. Could you give us some examples? Crap, everything just moved. Could you give us some examples of that? What happened? When in the process did you discover this? Yes. Well, the genesis of framing came from, okay, well, your question is, we overuse the sprint process. Yes, okay. So like, for example, kind of very meta, but when we were designing and building Duco, because it was an app meant to help groups run design sprints, we went way overboard. Like a lot of the decisions that we came to were using the design sprint process itself. So we've done it internally, overusing to make very simple discussions, to hold very simple discussions about how a specific page should look and function, right? So if you're at the feature level, there's a good chance that you're using the sprint for something that can just be a design discussion. So something that you can just have a quick iteration. Because design feedback and collaboration is still a thing that sprints should not replace. The time that we discovered that we were completely using a sprint for something illegitimate was when we discovered framing. It was years ago. We were in Berlin. We had flown to Berlin, a bunch of us. We were working with a startup. They were on their third version of their product. We had spent a month beforehand validating that they were ready for a sprint. We had gone through all their prospectus and materials, their research, their testimonials from customers, their pitch decks. And after a month of all those conversations, got into the room, ran our sprint. The afternoon of day one, we invalidated their entire business model. So that was one of the key moments where we decided that we need to do something before getting into the room to do a sprint. Let's see. I think I answered everything. If I didn't, I'm going to open the chat right now. If I didn't, let me stop presenting. Cool. One more near the top of the list. Okay. From Eric. Let's see. Eric, is it still there or did I answer it? Ah, yes, I see it. How do you sell the problem framing workshop? Aha. when the client has already decided to run a sprint and has no more budget availability? Well, I'll try my best. Sometimes time and budget, because everything I do, I have to design around the time and the money. What I'll try to do then is to repurpose day one to seed in some of the framing that I would want to do outside and beforehand, just to make sure the team is truly aligned, because the understand phase of the sprint in my view has not been designed well, right? If you go through it, somebody stands up and says, this is what we're here to talk about, and everybody kind of just does this. And that for me is broken, because Jose stood up, talked about the challenge. I was reading an email, and then I heard part of what he said, and then I decided that it's a stupid idea, or I already know how to solve this, because we all have our own mental models of the world. And somebody just standing up and talking about the challenge for 20 minutes, for me, felt very broken. And so framing is different in the sense that you've held that conversation already, you visualized it, the ideas and the outputs. And now minimally, you're coming to the start of a sprint with a big map of what the current experience looks like and what the team has decided, how you arrived at this being an important problem. And that's a very different start to framing than it is just talking. Because now people can stand up, they can see it, they can interact with it. If it's a mural board, they can see the ideas, they can build on top of that, right? That's the spirit of design thinking. So I would explain that process to them, and that it's a day, and we're going to add one more day. And I think it's going to make sure that we don't waste the next 5 days, because there's a real good chance that if we don't frame, that there's going to be total misalignment. We're going to have the wrong people, and we're going to have to do this all over again in 2 to 3 weeks from now. So I use a little bit of fear, but it's fact-based fear, because it's happened to me on more than one occasion. And it's just a small amount of time. So I really try to get them over that hump. If I cannot, if we're set with schedules and everything's booked already, then like I said, I'll just do, what I'll actually have them do is I'll just have them do the last step of problem framing, which is I'll break them up, work individually, spend 15 minutes, spend 5 minutes writing what you think the challenge is, using those 5 containers. What's the problem? What's the problem? Who's experiencing it? Why is it important? Blah, blah, blah. Have each person write that down individually, and then have a quick round table on what everybody came up with, and eventually try to brainstorm to narrow in on the challenge, what everybody is there for. If what I see is one person is solving for one persona, another's in a different market, talking about the challenge from completely different points of view, I use that as an opportunity to say, do you still want to move forward with this conversation? Because what I see is you seem very misaligned on what we're here to talk about. For me, this would be a real concern and a red flag to continue moving forward with your sprint on. That's how I would do that. Sell them some fear. Everyone, fear is an easy drug to sell. Cool. I think so. Yeah, I think that's everything. I think we answered everything.
Yeah.
It's 12.
All right, Jay. Thank you very much. I mean, you're being generous with your time. I mean, there is a lot of good questions, and actually, you have hijacked my webinar, because I couldn't see any Q&A whatsoever. So
Yes.
I'm really happy that you could see them.
At least one of us could. Oh, by the way, I don't know if this works, but you can save the chat. I think anyone can save the chat, but I'm not sure if it saves the Q&A. But maybe if there's a way to save the Q&A, you know what I'll do? I'll take a couple screenshots for you.
Okay, do that.
Yeah,
please, that will be awesome.
Because then we can capture the questions, which I love hearing these questions. They're really helpful for me as well.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'll take a.
And please send this picture to me, so then I know.
Yeah. I'll only charge you a little bit.
Awesome. And again, thank you very much, Jay. And thank you all guys for being here and being curious and for wanting to learn more about Design Sprint and how to be successful in what you do. So For me is yeah, thank you for your time, your attention, you Jay, and you all guys, and as I always say, I need your help. Me and my colleague Ram, we need your help. So if you have some topics, if you have something in your heart that you would like to share, topics about design sprints, design thinking, agile, service design, and you would like to share with the community, please let me know, because then we can plan. And it's kind of suck that we are in this COVID time, that everything has to go through webinars and stuff. I really would like to meet you all guys, but this is the best thing that we can do. So thank you for your time. So, and see you soon, hopefully here or in LinkedIn or in some other place, and hopefully having a beer if you live in Oslo. So bye bye guys.
See you guys. Thanks for having me, Jose.
Awesome.